one of the reasons I think that Stoics are having such a moment is people are desperate for a non-relativist moral code.
Yes.
Where they like an absolute right and an absolute wrong, and this whataboutism. Well, you know, I was at the White House a year ago for this book when Wheeler Parker introduced Joe Biden. I walked out of that room terrified because I was like, he's in a lot worse shape than we're being told.
Yeah.
And the degree to which they were lying to the American public, and the degree to which people who I love want to defend him for that out of like a whataboutism. Like there's just such a moral relativity now where nothing's wrong if it's your tribe doing it.
Yeah.
And like you've gotten Willie Reed, who agreed to testify and totally blew up his life. I mean, he's one of the main characters in this book. His grandfather told him not to do it.
Yeah.
Because he knew what was going to happen.
Yeah.
He didn't get rewarded.
Right.
He testified and it ruined his life.
Yeah.
And he ran from those ghosts changed his name.
Yeah.
Like he was not rewarded whatsoever in any shape, form, or fashion in this life for doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Doing the right thing often has no material reward and in fact often brings terrible consequences. It certainly did for all these witnesses in this case.
Well, you think about William Bradford Huey, right? What I loved about Three Lives for Mississippi was Mickey Schwimmer? He goes down there, he's doing what's obviously the right thing. And, you know, he's just, it's not like they threw him a parade. I mean, he was viciously murdered and dumped in a ditch and they piled dirt over
in the Bogachita swamp. And like you know, my wife worked at the William Winter Institute for Racial Reconciliation at Ole Miss, and she worked down the hall from Rita Schwerner, who was Mickey's widow.
Wow. She stayed?
She came back to do a thing.
Wow.
And it just, every time I saw her there, and do you know the name of the building that her office was in?
Something terrible, right?
Vardaman Hall. The past isn't dead, it isn't even past.
Yeah.
And like, you know, there's this incredible, let me see this thing.
Yeah.
This you just talk about the conspiracy of Southern politicians.
Yeah.
Here we go. This is.
What do you think of Schwimmer's last words? I can't wrap my head around them.
Oh, do you think it's true?
What he said, that he said it?
Yeah.
Oh, because Huey might have made him up?
I don't know. So I got to find this real quick.
Yeah.
Do I have an index? Yes, I do. Well, that's fun.
Yeah, for people who don't know, you don't have to make your own index. It just shows up. They charge you for it, but it shows up.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
God, can you imagine making this yourself? All right, Sun House. This is when the civil rights workers have gone missing.
Oh, where they gaslit Johnson about it, right?
Yes, this is just like, because they were totally gaslighting Johnson about it, and here we go. This is it. Senator Eastland told President Johnson the civil rights workers weren't actually missing and that it was all a publicity stunt designed to make the good white people of Mississippi look bad. Eastland hung up. Exactly 6 minutes later, Johnson got a call from the FBI telling him that the burned wreck of a station wagon had been found 30 feet off the highway through the Bogachita swamp. 6 minutes.
Yeah.
And like over and over, every conspiracy theory, they said that it wasn't Emmett Till's body. When they the reason they exhumed Emmett Till when they were going to try to retry this case is because it was proven in court that the body was not. So they did a DNA test. Of course it was.
It is kind of fascinating that that's an underexplored part of the civil rights movement where you have people like Johnson. I mean, Johnson's born racist, raised by racists, partly like the awakening that they have when they realize there's like the other politicians aren't just doing it cynically, but really believe it and are ready to take it to extremes that even a Johnson wouldn't consider. Do you know what I mean? Like his those 6 minutes changed Johnson's life.
Because this guy is just like, every time
he thinks he's dealing with a genteel racist and realizes he's dealing with a
Well, because and the thing I would argue is that they're the same thing, and so like,
Of course.
so like, but like it's interesting though, because not of course, I mean, because like the difference between Vardaman and Percy,
Yeah.
who were mortal enemies, I mean, I think like you only really see the South when you see race and class together. Because so many books focus on one or the other.
Sure.
And the Venn diagram of that becomes really interesting. I mean, like the only so the federal government bought the sunflower plantation in the 1930s because all of the farm subsidies that were written as part of the New Deal, I mean, essentially all still exist.
Yeah.
And what they did was they statutorily tried to set the buying power of farmers to equal what it was between like 1916 and 1920. So first of all, if it ever seems like Mississippi is stuck in the past, that's because statutorily it is.
Yeah.
But the other thing that's really interesting is the federal government bought the sunflower plantation, which in some ways you realize like, oh, this is a move to improve the economy because we have these big industrialists and cotton has been replaced by oil and synthetics.
Yeah.
And let's figure out a way for them to get their capital out of here so they can deploy it somewhere else in the economy. They bought this plantation and then they broke it up into 40-acre plots.
Yeah.
And then they moved all of the black sharecroppers off. The only people so the Roosevelt administration was fighting with local plantation owners. The plantation owners were trying to get the sharecroppers to be able to keep the land.
Yeah.
And the Roosevelt administration took it from them.
Interesting.
So the guy who owned the barn where Emmett Till was killed was fighting with the Roosevelt administration on behalf of the sharecroppers.
Right.
You'd think it would be the other way around.
Yeah, sure.
And he's writing letters, just being like, can somebody explain to me why you're kicking? These people are great farmers.
Yeah.
They're great neighbors. Yeah. They have a church here. They have a cemetery. They've been here for generations. If you're going to give this land to someone, why don't you give it to them?
Yeah.
And the Roosevelt administration had all these ideas about best practices.
Yeah.
And so they were trying to go find superior farmers from out of state. And so like they didn't know they were being racist.
Right.
But
that's the systemic racism.
But they were like, it's just wild. And so they moved all of these people in. So the Delta the Klan never really had a foothold because the Delta was these huge plantation blocks. And the plantation owners, the last thing they wanted was a bunch of rednecks scaring their labor.
Right.
And so the Percys of the world were able to keep the Klan out.
Yeah.
Except in this one block of Drew, Mississippi, surrounding the barn where Emmett Till was killed, which was the only real place like this in the Central Delta where there were lots of small white farmers.
Right.
And so the reason that like people talk about there was a Klan in Drew when there wasn't in other places in the Delta was all because of that. Yeah. And so it was the unintended consequences of sort of U.S. Department of Agriculture best practices. And I mean, so like over and over, the unintended consequences.
Yeah, when people talk about reparations, they skip over more recent injustices that were done by the state to groups of people.
Well, and also like
it wasn't this thing that happened once. It was a perpetuated.
And like when I grew up in Mississippi, like everything was on a charge account because it wasn't really a cash economy.
Yeah.
Because nobody had money till the crops were sold in November, and then everybody got straight.
Yeah. So
the degree to which all large scale agriculture is, I mean, it's not a Ponzi scheme. That's totally unfair. It isn't at all. But it's a lot of moving stuff around on paper.
Yeah.
And it's
financially engineered in a way that you don't. It seems like honest work and an honest living.
But it's all credit.
Yeah.
And the banks determine what you plant based on prices.
Yeah.
And like, we farm, we have to get a huge crop loan every year.
Yeah.
And, and so it's all based on credit. And credit, like, if I had my family farm with the exact same amount of land and the exact same financial history, and I went in to get a loan, I wouldn't be able to get as good a loan as my uncle who runs the farm because he has their faith and he's been doing it a long time and they trust him. So credit is already it's already
interpersonal
and it's already like we try to have forms for people to fill out, but it really is, if you're the banker, do you believe I'm going to pay you back?
Right.
And so, the ways in which credit markets screwed people, and you had, black farmers who had no access to credit and a really thin like a really short leash
Yeah.
on getting foreclosed.
Right.
And like the degree to which their reparations owed for that.
Yeah.
I mean, like, that's, and, and it's interesting too, because like most of the people who own the land, most of the land, like the old Milam plantation is owned by a publicly traded company that's owned by, BlackRock and Vanguard. And like, if you have a 401k, you own plantations.
Yeah, sure.
And so these are most, like, a lot of the old families around where we farm, like they didn't make it through the 80s. So these are like Bill Gates is the third largest landowner in the state of Mississippi. Like these are huge institutional owners of this land, because it's farmland is inflation proof.
Yeah.
And so it's not tied to other fundamentals in the markets.
Yeah.
So like huge like pension funds, 401ks, high net worth people, there's always like a bedrock level of farmland. And like, so one of the animating ideas of the book is like following the money.
Yeah.
And like, why is it so often that the more valuable dirt is, the less valuable humans are?
Yeah.
And like, I don't know. I mean, it's like all of that is incredibly interesting about how the cognitive dissonance and the sort of unintended consequences.
Yeah. The last thing I was going to ask you about is you talk about it towards the end, but you sort of had this teenage rebellion, apathetic, sort of, if I don't try, then when I fail, it doesn't say anything about me. And then you're sort of embracing kind of some Southern mythology, but you had this sort of teacher that sets you straight.
Yeah.
And I think that's such an interesting intervention, because it's so hard to get people, as we said, it's hard to get people to understand things that are painful to understand. And he managed to do that to you in a way.
Well, the story is, I was at an event at the courthouse where the trial was, and it was an anniversary. It was the National Park dedication. And Gloria Dickerson, one of the people like the heroes of this book, was speaking. And she did this thing, sort of like a moment of silence, but just breathing. Mm-hmm. And I had a memory that I hadn't thought of. I remembered the story I'm about to tell, I hadn't thought of in 20 years.
Yeah.
Like, swear to God.
Yeah.
And it came back to me, and it was so incredible. And I just remember, like, had all these Confederate flags and Confederate stuff. And like, I went to a boarding school and hated the boarding school, and realized that like, I just was totally lost, and like, really struggled, and like trying to find an identity, and like so I really like had all of this sort of Confederate iconography. And I had a teacher at the boarding school. It was a music teacher. I've been trying to find the guy's name separate from this.
Oh, you can't remember?
I cannot remember. It's Dan something, but when I Google it. So anyway, he basically pulled me aside, and instead of just screaming at me, was just like, "You're an idiot. You don't understand what this means to people."
Yeah. And
walked me through it. And I just remember in that moment feeling so ashamed that like I didn't know.
Yeah.
And I write in here that I want everybody to read this book.
Yeah.
Like I want
to
sell a quadrillion copies, all of it.
Yeah.
But like, I really want every idiot 18-year-old.
But you didn't know, because people worked very hard for you not to know.
My entire, like my high school, this is not a joke. Yeah. My high school history teacher called the Civil War the War of Northern Aggression.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
I just grew up in a world in which none of this was taught. And like, if you don't really know the history of your home, then you really don't know anything.
Yeah.
And if you don't really know where you're from, like really know, then you're not from anywhere.
Yeah.
And you're just adrift, and none of this is real. And I felt like this started during the pandemic. Like I was working on a story, and I wanted to do the Great Migration story of every member of the Los Angeles Lakers.
Oh, wow.
And so Avery Bradley was on that team, and Avery Bradley's from Mount Bio, Mississippi, which is very close to the barn. And one of the witnesses who testified was a woman named Amanda Bradley. So there was this brief moment where I wondered.
Yeah.
And they're not related, but in the process of finding that out, one of the Till scholars I talked to was like, "Do you know about the barn?" And I'm like, "What barn?" Yeah. And here we are.